Have you ever wondered if someone who made the worst mistakes in life can truly find redemption? What if deep down they had one last chance to change, but needed to face their own demons and fight against an unrelenting force to do so? Today, you're going to hear the story of Jack Donovan, a man who, in the heart of the Old West, made choices that marked him forever. But can violence and a heavy past be left behind? Or would the very law that hunted him for years demand its price, no matter how much he had changed? Jack Donovan wasn't just an ordinary outlaw. He was the kind of man who sent chills down your spine just by hearing his name. Between murders, robberies, and a life of constant fleeing, he was a nightmare for many. However, behind all of this, there was something few knew about: an internal struggle for change, a deep desire for redemption. Have you ever felt that, despite everything you've done, there's something inside of you still searching for a second chance? That's what Jack felt when, in a moment of pure adversity, he had to make a decision that would change his life forever. But like all Old West stories, Jack's redemption wouldn't be easy. He was about to discover that true transformation requires more than courage. It demands immense sacrifices, impossible choices, and a constant battle against a past that would never let him be at peace. And on the horizon, a family he swore to protect would become the reason for his final fight. Would Jack Donovan manage to come out of this as a new man, or would he be consumed by the weight of the law and his past? Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover might surprise you. And remember, the Old West is a place where decisions are made with courage, but they come at a very high price. What did Jack have to lose to finally find something he never thought possible? Redemption. This is a story of sacrifice, of confronting oneself and fighting against an unforgiving reality. Now keep watching, because Jack Donovan's journey is about to begin. As Jack Donovan found himself more deeply immersed in his journey of change, there was something he couldn't escape. The weight of his past would always come back, like a shadow, ready to collect its due. At the same time, the possibility of a new beginning shone like a distant star in the sky. That's how it happens when we try to change. The road is tough, full of obstacles, and often the fear of what's to come can be stronger than the hope of what we can achieve. But what Jack didn't know was that his fight for redemption would touch many more people than he ever imagined. If you've ever gone through something similar, a moment when you had to make tough choices, or even fight against the consequences of something you did in the past, you know how hard it is to move forward. And that's exactly what we're talking about today: the possibility of a fresh start, of seeking forgiveness, and of fighting for change. If this topic resonates with you, if you've ever felt the weight of your own choices and the search for something more, leave a comment below telling us what has touched you most about this story so far. Let's share our experiences and reflections, because this space is for those who believe in the power of transformation. So, if you're enjoying this story and feel that it resonates with you, don't forget to leave a like. It helps us keep bringing more exciting content like this stories that touch the heart and make us think. Your participation here is what helps this channel grow, what helps more people discover stories of redemption, sacrifice, and courage. If you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe now. This way, you'll be notified every time we have more videos like this, with stories that make us reflect on life, destiny, and the choices that define who we are. But of course, Jack Donovan's journey isn't over yet. What comes next will surprise you, because the path to redemption is never simple. Now let's continue. When we look at the life of a man like Jack Donovan, we see much more than just a simple outlaw from the Old West. What we find is someone who, throughout his entire existence, carried a heavy burden of wrong choices, pain, and regrets. But what if he had a chance to change? And what if, as unlikely as it may seem, the very pain of the past became the fuel for a new beginning? The quest for redemption, as difficult as it seems, is one of the deepest and most universal human journeys. At some point in life, we all ask ourselves, can I free myself from the weight of my mistakes? Is there truly a chance to start over? Jack Donovan lived over the years as a man marked by the law, by blood, and by violence. He was an outlaw, not just because of the actions he committed, but because of the mindset he adopted. In the Old West, where survival was the priority, no one had time for regrets. And yet, he began to question, do I deserve something better? This doesn't happen overnight. It's not simple, it's not easy. But transformation begins with a simple question, with the first step toward the unknown. And Jack, in a moment of pure desperation, found something he thought he'd never find: a reason to change. What does it take for someone to redeem themselves? It's not just about making peace with the past. Redemption is more than that. Redemption is a process of confrontation, of looking at one's own demons and facing them with courage. Contrary to what many think, it's not about erasing what's been done, but about taking responsibility for what's been caused, and from that point, moving forward with a transformed mindset. Jack had to face this truth at a moment in his life when the only thing he had was the chance to protect the only thing that could make him a better person, a family. And by doing so, he discovered what truly matters in life: others, and the impact we can have on those we love. Jack's struggle wasn't just against the law. It wasn't just against the bounty hunter. He was fighting against something much bigger: his own identity, the idea that he could never be a better person, the conviction that the weight of his sins would define him forever. However, it was the moment he chose to protect the family that took him in that he discovered the hidden truth we all carry: we are more than our mistakes. The power of transformation is inside each of us, but it only reveals itself when we make courageous decisions, when we choose to truly change the mindset with which we face the world. And as difficult as it was, Jack was finally starting to understand that. Now, the big question was whether he could sustain this transformation until the end, whether the pressure of his past would destroy him before he had a chance to experience peace. Deep down, we all have a Jack Donovan within us, someone who has made mistakes, someone who feels the weight of past choices. And the question is, what will you do with it? How will you deal with the decisions we make and the impact they have on our journey? Jack had the opportunity to show that even in the worst circumstances, there is still room for redemption. But that path would not be without sacrifices. Throughout his journey, Jack faced much more than enemies on the outside. He faced doubt, fear, and the weight of a lifetime of wrong choices. And it was right there, precisely there, that he had to make the most difficult decision: to sacrifice his own life, his freedom, for something greater than himself, protecting those he loved most. This choice, however simple it may seem, is actually a reflection of the internal struggle we all face. Because in the end, true redemption doesn't come from the forgiveness of others. It begins when we manage to forgive ourselves and do what's right, even when the only possible reward is inner peace. Jack Donovan was not an ordinary man. He was the kind of fugitive that made others tremble. His name was printed on every wanted poster, and in the stories told around campfires he was a legend of fear. But who was the man behind this ruthless image? What secrets did he carry, hidden behind eyes hardened by violence and the pain of a tumultuous past? Don't be fooled. The weight of Jack Donovan's story was not just made up of crimes, deaths, and a life of escapes. He was more than that, more than just an outlaw. Because no matter how much the world tried to label him, no matter how much he himself tried to hide behind his tough persona, there was something inside, a silent battle, a war against his own nature. Jack was shaped by the harsh streets, by life and death situations in a world as unforgiving as the Old West. He grew up in the shadows of desolation, where survival was a daily struggle, and where morality often became a relative concept. When law and order were distant concepts, the only thing that truly mattered was willpower, the ability to impose oneself to survive. And Jack learned this early on, but as much as he could face any threat, disarm any man, there was something he couldn't control: his own pain, his own emptiness. Because when violence becomes such an intrinsic part of your identity, it's impossible not to carry the scars, not just on your body, but on your soul. Jack's pain wasn't just physical. He knew that by committing his crimes, he was digging a deep abyss between him and any chance of redemption. When he killed, robbed, or destroyed, he wasn't just facing those trying to stop him, he was facing himself. Every shot fired, every robbery committed, was like another step away from the person he could have been, and this ate him up inside. He didn't want to be the man the world thought he was, but at that time the idea of change seemed distant, like a far-off star in the sky. The transformation he longed for seemed impossible. Jack knew this, and no matter how much he tried to run away, the shadow of his past grew ever closer. He always thought he would be an immortal man, a legend who would never have to pay for his sins. But as time passed, he realized that true immortality doesn't come from fame, but from the impact we leave on the lives of others. And it was in the most unexpected moment that he found the key to changing his own life, by saving a family in danger. This family, which until then seemed like an insignificant part of his journey, became the only thing Jack really had. They were the opportunity he had been searching for, the chance he didn't know he still could have. When Jack found himself for the first time in a situation where he wasn't fighting for himself, where his own life was no longer the only thing that mattered, he began to realize that maybe change was possible. But the truth is, even in light of this revelation, he still saw himself divided. He still carried the weight of the choices he had made, and the fear that he wouldn't be able to escape his own identity haunted him. And this internal struggle, this conflict between the man he was and the man he wanted to be, wasn't something Jack could resolve immediately. It wouldn't be that simple, because true redemption doesn't come without a price. Now, what no one knew was that this transformation journey of Jack wasn't just about seeking forgiveness. It was about facing his own demons, about challenging himself to be something more than others thought he would be. He wasn't just fighting against bounty hunters or the law of the Old West. He was fighting against his own nature, against the weight of the choices that had defined him for so many years. And it was in this internal clash that Jack began to discover true strength. He wasn't just changing from the outside in. He was transforming his mindset, his worldview, his very identity. Now I want to dive even deeper into this subject, because what Jack discovered and what he faced wasn't just an external battle. The journey of redemption he began to walk wasn't just about what he did or didn't do. It was about the mindset he began to adopt, the decisions he started to make, and the impact those choices could have on his life and the lives of those around him. And this is where the true power of transformation begins to be revealed. Everything started to change for Jack Donovan the moment he least expected. During one of his escapes, when he thought he was completely alone in the world, he came across a situation that would change his life forever. A simple family, but with an impressive strength, was the one who made him question everything he believed about himself. They were there, in a small, isolated house, vulnerable and defenseless. And in that moment, Jack was forced to make a decision. For a moment, he had to set aside his entire past, the murders he had committed, the robberies that still haunted him, and focus on something he had never had, someone to protect. Sarah's family, a strong woman full of hope, came to Jack like a ray of light in the darkness he lived in. She and her children had nothing to do with the world of crime and violence he had sunk into, yet that night, Jack's life became intertwined with theirs in a way he couldn't have predicted. The most curious part of all of this is that while he believed he was saving their lives, what was really happening was quite different. They were saving his. It was as if, by protecting that family, Jack was allowing himself, for the first time, to be something more than the figure he had created for himself. He finally found a reason to fight, something worth changing for, and it was no longer about him. It was about those around him. And that was where the key to his redemption became clear. It wasn't the bounty hunter chasing him, nor the weight of the crimes he had committed. What made him human again was love, the need to protect, to care. What he had never imagined, and maybe even feared to imagine, was that he had, within him, the capacity to love and be something more than an outlaw. As hard as it was, Jack was beginning to realize that true strength didn't lie in his ability to destroy, but in his capacity to sacrifice for something greater than himself. Sarah's family's presence was the turning point Jack so desperately needed. He not only became someone with a purpose, but he also began to realize that every action he took now had a real impact on people's lives. By protecting those he loved, he was also creating a new version of himself. But this wasn't easy. As much as the desire to change was there, the old scars and the bandit mentality persisted, like ghosts from his past, always trying to pull him back. He knew that redemption wouldn't come without internal battles. Jack's greatest enemy was himself, and the greatest challenge would be overcoming himself, accepting human fragility, and understanding that we are all more than the mistakes we make. And so, at the moment, he decided, For the first time, to put someone else's needs before his own, Jack not only took a step toward redemption, but he also discovered what had always been within his reach, the chance to rebuild his story, to write a new chapter. The life of that family, in its simplicity and need for protection, became the greatest reflection of what he had always wanted. They were the reason he could no longer live as he had before. Every decision he made now was tied to those he now called his family. To them, Jack was just a man trying to do what's right, someone willing to change. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what Jack began to understand in that moment wasn't just about saving other people. It was about understanding that true redemption starts with self-awareness. He had to look at his own life and understand that, in order to change, he could no longer hide behind his outlaw story. He had to stop seeing himself as a product of his past and start believing that the people around him could be the motivation for him to become a better man. And it's at this point in the journey that true transformation begins, when we start looking at others and see that by protecting them, we are also protecting ourselves. As Jack Donovan delved deeper into this new life, he began to lose himself in thoughts about what the chance he had been given really meant. Every day, when he looked into the innocent eyes of the family he was now protecting, a growing doubt took over him. Did he deserve this chance for change? Could someone like him, with so many lives destroyed by his path of crime and violence, really redeem himself? The question seemed to hammer in his mind incessantly, as if he was being tested all the time. He wanted to believe it, that there was something inside him capable of changing, but the past was always there, like a shadow that pursued him. As he tried to engage more with Sarah's family, Jack found himself torn. On one hand, the love and care he was beginning to feel for them motivated him to move forward, to be a different person, a more just one. But on the other, the weight of the mistakes he had made, the lives he had taken, and the dreams he had destroyed was something he couldn't just erase. He knew that every choice from his past had a price. Every murder, every betrayal, every lie. How could someone with so many mistakes expect to be accepted by those who needed protection the most? He saw himself as a marked man, condemned to live with the consequences of his actions, and somehow this made him feel even more unfit for the life he was trying to build. This internal conflict was what really started to consume Jack. He didn't know if he could leave his past behind. How could he? It was impossible to erase the marks he had left, and in every moment of reflection, he felt the raw truth. It wouldn't be easy, and maybe not even possible. Sometimes he felt that, no matter how much he tried, the past would always catch up with him. The idea of a man like him, marked by violence and regret, being capable of creating something good, of becoming someone worthy of respect, seemed almost impossible. Doubts consumed him. And then, amidst this emotional struggle, the big question emerged. Could Jack really change? Could he be more than the outlaw, more than the criminal everyone feared? Or was he an irrevocably lost man, forever defined by his past? Each day that passed was a battle, and the questions grew stronger. Did I deserve this peace? Did I deserve to live this new life? These doubts were so present that many times Jack felt that the only way to find peace would be to run away, to return to his old life, where he knew what to expect. He believed that redemption wasn't for someone like him, but still something inside him refused to accept that idea. He saw the eyes of Sarah's children, the trust they placed in him, and felt enormous pressure to be a better person, not just for them, but for himself. He wanted to believe that he could free himself from the weight of his own story and be able to do good, to rebuild himself. But the journey wouldn't be simple, and the path was full of doubts, insecurities, and moments where he questioned his own ability to transform. As time passed, Jack began to realize that true redemption wouldn't come from a simple gesture or a single decision. It wouldn't be as if he could just erase his past and live as if nothing had happened. True redemption came from within, from the understanding that he didn't have to be perfect to be worthy. He didn't need to erase his past, but he did have to learn how to deal with it, accept it, and make choices that would lead him to a more just path. And this was a painful lesson. Jack realized that in order to redeem himself, he didn't have to be someone new, but someone more honest with himself. someone willing to face his own flaws and fight against what he had always been. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject because Jack's true struggle was just beginning. The change he was seeking wouldn't come from a single act of courage. It was a long journey full of challenges, a transformation that would begin with self-acceptance. It wouldn't be easy because, like all of us, he was afraid of failing, of not being able to move forward. But what Jack discovered in this process is something we all can learn. Redemption doesn't come from trying to be perfect, but from being true to yourself. The peace Jack Donovan had started to build, the life he was trying to rebuild, would not last long, as if fate was always lurking, ready to rip away any opportunity for a fresh start. The threat he had feared for so long was approaching. The bounty hunter was on his way, and with him came the law itself, the one Jack had run from for so long. It was the imminence of tragedy, a constant pressure, as if the shadows of his past were about to swallow everything he was trying to do right. Jack felt this deep in his bones. With every glance he shared with the family, he was beginning to see as his own. He knew that no matter how much he tried to be a different man, a new man, the law would not leave him in peace. The hunt was on, and everyone knew that a man with Jack's past couldn't simply disappear. He could try to change, but the law of the Old West didn't care about redemption, didn't care about a man's mistakes or successes. It only wanted criminals to pay for what they had done. Jack was in a race against time, and he felt it cruelly every day, every minute that passed. The bounty hunter wasn't just a man chasing a reward. He was the personification of the unforgiving law that would never forgive, and that left Jack in a greater dilemma. He knew he was living a lie, that his escape wouldn't be eternal. But more than that, he was beginning to realize that the real pressure came from within. How could he continue protecting Sarah's family if at any moment he could be captured? How could he build a new life if the weight of his past was always at his door waiting to destroy him? He wondered if his attempt at redemption was just an illusion, if everything would end the same way, with him being hunted to the end. But there was one more thing Jack couldn't ignore. The bounty hunter was coming after him, yes, but he was also a reflection of Jack's own fear. It was the fear that no matter how much he tried, he would never be more than a criminal, a man marked by his own history. But at the same time, there was a flame inside him that wouldn't go out. He felt that no matter how intolerable the pressure from the law became, he couldn't live just for himself anymore. That family, the eyes of Sarah's children, her smile, were the only reasons keeping him strong. No matter how the world around him wanted to crush him, Jack refused to fall without a fight, refused to let his last chance at redemption be destroyed by the law or by his own fear. And it was at this point in the story that Jack realized something crucial. It wasn't just the law he needed to face. The real battle was being waged inside him, in the form of his own insecurities, his own regrets. The external pressure from the bounty hunter made him feel cornered, but what he really needed to overcome was his own belief that he didn't deserve a second chance. Life was giving him a unique opportunity for change, but he needed to decide, once and for all, if he was really ready to fight for it. The doubt, the fear of failing, the idea that he would never be worthy were always there, present as a shadow in every step he took. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what Jack was experiencing was not just an external pursuit. He was being consumed by his own mind, by the idea that he didn't deserve the peace he was now seeking. The impact of the pressure from the law and the bounty hunter himself was enormous, but what was destroying him the most was the constant internal struggle, the fear of being insufficient. Jack was about to discover that, in the end, the greatest reward he could achieve didn't come from escaping or defeating the bounty hunter, but from the battle he was fighting with himself. He would have to decide, could he live with the truth that his past mistakes would not define him, or would he be consumed by his own fear, by the weight of what he had already done? It was in a moment of absolute silence, when tension hung in the air, that Jack Donovan finally made the decision that would change his life forever. The law was closer than ever, and the bounty hunter was only a few hours away from reaching him. But in that instant, amidst the fear and pressure, something inside Jack stirred. He looked at the family he had sworn to protect, into the innocent eyes of the children and Sarah's determined face, and for the first time in a long time, he felt that his life had a real purpose. The weight of his crimes, his choices, felt lighter in that moment because he was about to do the only thing that still gave him meaning: defend those who, unknowingly, were giving him the chance to be a better man. Fear was still there, of course. How could it not be? Jack's past was behind him, ready to collect. But when he looked at that family, he finally understood that protecting them meant more than his own life. He was no longer the outlaw who fled at all costs, nor the man afraid of his own story. He was someone willing to sacrifice everything. And this was not just about the struggle for survival, but about doing what was right. He knew that, by protecting that family, he was not only facing the law or the bounty hunter, he was facing the greatest battle of his life, the fight against his own fear of becoming someone better. Jack felt the weight of the decision was too much to bear, but at the same time, there was a strength inside him, something greater than himself, pushing him forward. The idea of fighting for those he loved was stronger than any doubt, than any shadow of the past that still haunted him. In a world where survival was all that mattered, he now saw the true importance of a genuine sacrifice. He was ready to give everything for those who, unknowingly, were helping him rewrite his own story. It was then that, for the first time, Jack felt a momentary peace. He knew that, no matter what happened, he had already made the right choice. Protecting them wasn't just about stopping the law from catching him. It was about finally breaking free from the chains that had held him for so long. He was no longer running. He wasn't fleeing from who he was. Jack was facing the truth of his own transformation. He was no longer the man he had been. He had chosen to be someone different, someone willing to fight for the good of others, for a better future. But, like in every great decision, doubt was still there, whispering, what if it wasn't enough? What if he failed? The pain of knowing he couldn't erase everything he had done was still present, but somehow protecting that family had shown him something he had never known was possible. He could, yes, be more than his history. He could become the change he had always sought. And this was when Jack found what many of us seek in our own lives, the hidden truth that redemption doesn't lie in erasing the past, but in making choices that define us in the present. The decision to protect that family, to place himself as their guardian, was the key to Jack's true transformation. And this transformation, as difficult as it was, led him to the greatest revelation. What he feared, what he thought he could never change, was finally within reach. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what Jack discovered in this moment was something we all need to understand. True strength isn't in fighting against others, but in fighting against our own fears, our own limitations. True transformation begins when we decide that what is right is worth more than any cost. And when we make that decision, we begin to see that what really matters is others, the way we can positively impact the lives of those around us. The final battle was more than a simple confrontation. It was the culmination of everything Jack Donovan had lived through up to that point: his internal struggle, his regrets, the choice to redeem himself, and the price he was willing to pay to protect the family he now considered his own. Every step took toward the enemy was a risky decision, but at the same time it was a statement that he was no longer the man who fled. He had transformed, he had changed, and now, more than ever, he knew what really mattered. When the first shots began to rip through the air, Jack felt the weight of the truth in every shot. They weren't just bullets coming toward him. They were the ghosts of his past, all the wrong choices and regrets he carried. Each shot fired felt like a goodbye to the shadows of his past, to the outlaw life he had left behind. But as much as the tension hung in the air, he didn't hesitate. Every movement he made, every action he took, was a conscious decision that he no longer cared about what the future held for him. What mattered now was what he could do in that moment to ensure that family's safety. And there, on that battlefield, something extraordinary happened. Jack was no longer fighting just against the lawman, the bounty hunter, or any physical enemy. He was fighting against everything he was, Against the very fears that had defined him for so long, he found himself in an existential dilemma. He knew that the price of his life could be the only price the family would pay to live, and yet he didn't hesitate. Each shot he fired, every movement, every breath, seemed to be an affirmation that he didn't care about death, but about the well-being of those he loved. Fear, pain, doubt, all of it was left behind when he made the decision to fight with everything he had. The fight was intense, but something in Jack's heart was different. He wasn't running anymore. He was facing what had once seemed impossible. He was fighting for a purpose greater than his own survival. He was fighting for the chance to give that family a life without fear, without pursuit, without the shadow of the law looming over them. He knew he was paying the highest price, but in doing so, he found true freedom. Not the freedom to escape the consequences of his mistakes, but the freedom to be something more, to finally be someone who could sacrifice for the good of others. The tension increased with every second. The sound of bullets echoed through the air, but Jack's mind was focused, clear. He wasn't fighting for his own life, but for theirs. He knew that by doing this, he was not only fighting for the family's survival, but for his own redemption. The sacrifice, no matter how painful, was the only way he found to break free from the chains that had bound him to a past of crimes and regrets. He didn't want to die, of course, but if his death was what was necessary to ensure their safety, he was willing to pay that price. And it was in that moment, at the height of the battle, that Jack realized something fundamental. He would never be able to erase what he had done, but the way he died, the kind of man he became in the end, would be what defined his legacy. He already knew he couldn't escape the ghosts of the past, but he could be remembered for his courage and his choice to protect rather than destroy. With every bullet fired, Jack wasn't just risking his life, he was redefining what the world saw in him. No longer the relentless outlaw, but a man who did the impossible for those he loved. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because Jack's sacrifice wasn't just about physical courage. It was an emotional decision, a decision that represented everything he had learned along his journey. What he did in that moment was more than an act of defense. It was a choice that transformed his own identity, a final test of his redemption. When you decide to fight for something greater than yourself, something worth more than your own life, you begin to realize that true transformation isn't about escaping the past, but facing it head-on, with courage. And by doing that, you not only change your story, but you redefine who you are. The battle finally reached its conclusion, and in the end, Jack Donovan fell. His body, marked by the fight and the weight of his own journey, seemed to have given in to the inevitable. But what many might see as the end of a life was actually the beginning of something much greater, the true redemption of a man. Deep inside himself, he knew that his death would not be in vain. The sacrifice he had made, the courage to face his own fear and pain, would become the story of a man who finally surrendered to forgiveness. But this forgiveness didn't come from others. It didn't come from those he had hurt in the past, nor from the bounty hunters who had been chasing him. The forgiveness Jack found was inside himself. He had lived a life full of mistakes, but in that last act of courage, of sacrifice, Jack proved to himself that redemption was not a prize he earned by merit, but a transformation he lived through the choices he made. It wasn't his death that would bring him peace, but the way he died. He did something that few would be able to do. He sacrificed himself to ensure that those he loved would have a chance at a life without the weight of persecution, without the constant fear of the law catching up to them. And by doing this, he found himself suddenly free. Free not from the weight of his mistakes, but free from the prison he had built by defining himself by his failures. Jack Donovan's true redemption was not about escaping the past, but facing it head-on. Jack's death was not just the end of his journey, but the culmination of everything he had learned, that no matter how hard it was, the greatest sacrifice of all would be the one in which you choose to do what's right, even when your own life is at risk. Ultimately, Jack's greatest revelation was realizing that forgiveness is not something that comes from outside, but something that comes from within. He forgave himself by choosing to do the right thing, even knowing it would mean losing his own life. What Jack didn't know, but what became clear now, is that his story, his courage, and his sacrifice would serve as a legacy for those he left behind. Sarah's family, whom he had protected with so much love and dedication, would now live with the freedom he had given them, a freedom won not by fleeing, but by the courage to face death itself. What Jack didn't expect was that by dying for them, he would become immortal, not for the bullets he faced, but for the example of love and sacrifice he left behind. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because the true meaning of redemption goes much further than Jack could imagine. It's not just about the acts we commit, but about how we choose to face the consequences of those acts. Redemption is not an end, but a continuous process of becoming better, more human, more aware of our impact on the world and the people around us. Jack's sacrifice teaches us that while we are all flawed, there are moments when, by doing what's right, we can find deep peace. And it is in that space, between mistakes and right choices, that true transformation happens. Jack Donovan's story is, without a doubt, one of the most touching stories we can tell. It challenges us to reflect on the true nature of redemption and how much we are willing to sacrifice for those we love. Jack was not a conventional hero. He didn't lead a life without flaws, but it was precisely this that made his journey so significant. The courage he had to face, not only the law, but also his own past, resonates deeply in all of us. Now, as we look at his story, the question arises, do we all have a chance to redeem ourselves, or is the weight of our past so great that it will never let us have peace? Jack seemed to believe that, no matter how dark his story was, there would always be a chance to do what's right. His journey teaches us that redemption is not easy, and it doesn't come without sacrifices. Often, it requires sacrificing what we love the most, facing our greatest fears, and above all, freeing ourselves from the idea that we are trapped by what we've done. What Jack discovered, and what perhaps many of us still need to learn, is that true redemption isn't about erasing the past. It begins the moment we choose to act according to what's right, no matter the cost. Perhaps the greatest challenge we all face is the internal struggle. We want to change, but we fear that the weight of our past will prevent us from moving forward. Jack's story shows us that, despite our mistakes, there's always room for a new choice, a new life. He wasn't perfect, he made grave mistakes, but in the end, he chose redemption. He chose to be someone worthy of protecting others, someone willing to sacrifice himself for their well-being. And this leads us to one final reflection. Would you give your life for those you love? Jack's sacrifice makes us think about how far we would be willing to go to ensure the safety and happiness of the people who mean the most to us. The real question, however, is redemption truly out of reach, or does it begin with a simple act of courage? Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because often we think we're trapped by our past choices as if they define who we are. But Jack showed us that, while the past cannot be erased, it doesn't have to define us. True strength comes from our decisions in the present, from the choices we make now. The impact we have on the lives of those around us is what truly makes us who we are. And perhaps that's what really matters, how much we can change and positively impact the lives of those we love. If you've made it this far, it's because this story touched something inside you. Jack Donovan's journey is about sacrifice, redemption, and courage. And if you followed along to the end, it's because somehow these messages relate to what you're also seeking. If this content resonated with you, if it connected with something deep, tell me in the comments. I'm with you until the end. I love knowing that we're together in this reflection. If you felt that this message is worth it, don't forget to leave a like here. It helps strengthen this connection, and it's a way to show that you also believe stories like this can transform us. And of course, if you want more stories that make us think and feel, subscribe to the channel. Here we're always in search of more reflection, transformation, and of course, stories that touch deeply. And to continue this journey with me, there's another video right here. That will move you in a different way, but just as emotionally. Click and let's keep walking this path together.